face Medusa, stone face Medusa, stone face Medusa, face Medusa, face Medusa, face Medusa, face Medusa, face Medusa. Don't miss with the 808.
All right, welcome to episode 5 of the Where Were We Again podcast. I have got with me a special guest, special because, we've gotten to have a lot of great conversations over the years. Zahna, my goodness, it's been a long time. I'm excited because, I think we've always had great conversations, and I don't think this is going to be any different. How have you been doing? I know it's been a little bit since I've seen you. I think last time I saw you was the Kingdom Come. Okay, look, there is a theme, right? That the last, the 3 of the 4 episodes already out have been with people I've had conversations with at Kingdom Come. So let's go for another. But
no,
doing?
That's great. I've been amazing. Thank you so much. You said before we started the episode, it had been since like 2019, and I'm like, what hasn't happened since 2019?
Right.
But no, it's great to be here. And yeah, KCF is the festival, so I'm glad that I got to see you there. And you saw you did some photos again this year for it. Is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh man, glad.
Some of my favorites too this year. Man, I tell you what.
Oh no, well, we appreciate it. Definitely, always having nice photos is nice.
Right. So, let's talk about something that just happened recently. So you just got off the road, doing something new. You just got off a speaking tour, so that was kind of cool. You went out with Becca. She was doing a solo thing. So, for those that haven't listened to the previous episode, you didn't know this was happening, but Becca from Reclaim the Day actually was talking about going out on a solo tour. And surprise, you actually got to be a guest speaker on that tour. So what was that like? This was something new for you, if I remember correctly. You haven't done anything like this before.
Yeah, so actually it's funny because I have a background in evangelism. Like I literally went to school for ministry, and right out of college, I just straight up got an opportunity to be a national touring artist. And so I took that, but I was fully planning on trying to, be a youth pastor at a church.
Oh, wow.
And so it's actually my degree. So when I, got into the band, just experienced the music industry, lived some life, and really, like I said, what hasn't happened in 4 years, essentially just so much had happened that I really just started feeling like a little unfulfilled doing some Zahna shows because it was just the me show, and I'm like, I'm not really happy with that because there's like so much substance that I'm not able or don't have time to talk about in my set, because they give you a certain set time that you're able to play songs within. And so, people are there to hear music. So it's just something that like in 5 minutes, I'm able to quickly just talk about the main points of my music and the album that I just put out called Stronger Than Death here in 2023. But this was so amazing because we called it the Unexpected Tour because Becca and I had, back in 2021, kind of told each other, hey, we still have a really big heart for worship and ministry. And we were actually recording the music video for our joint song together called Chokehold. So in the hotel, we were just kind of getting to know each other quite a bit. And I was just telling her that, this dream I had in my heart to public speak. And I, felt like the Lord was calling me to do that again, some way, somehow, at some point in my life. And just after a lot of things and years, I just really feel like she kind of, I love her. She's like my best friend. So she was like, hey, I'm going to do this worship tour. And I know that you want to do this too, but you're scared. So you know what? I'm just going to book the dates and you can tell me if you want to do this or not, but I'm going with or without you. And I'm like, bro, I'm not going to let her do this on her own. She's crazy. So I did. I really appreciate that she did that because it really like forced me to make a decision of like, hey, here's an opportunity and I can pursue this if I want to. And so it was really amazing because basically the tour consisted of just a lot of worship songs, a couple of originals that Becca had, but most of the time was allotted for me to actually speak about, biblical things and backed up with my life experience of the last couple of years. And just the impact that we saw from that was just mind blowing, like we really didn't have a whole lot of time to promote the tour. But we were like, you know what, this is kind of just a practice run anyway. So we were just expecting really little kind of places and like small crowds, which some of them were small, but there were some big ones there. And we were just really welcomed at some of these places. And the impact that we saw after the show was finished was just a lot of people coming up and explaining how, the message really touched them. Or, it was just a very intimate setting where people were able to, come hungry and receive of God. So, we talked about our music. I think I played like one original song, and that was cool. But we really wanted to make it something where it wasn't the us show. It was like, hey, we're here to worship God. We're here to support you if you need prayer. But here's the message we have. And I ended up talking a lot about like confusion and what like the enemy tries to do and to keep you depressed, to keep you in darkness. And a lot of times that has to do with your identity, which your identity, is, if you're following Christ, should be in Christ. And so how when we neglect our identity in God, that leads to depression and hopelessness, because you don't know who you are, you don't know where you're going. And so a lot of it, I was able to talk about my experience with my kidney transplant, and just basically how the entire process of writing my last album was almost breaking me. But the Lord came through, and I'm seeing massive success with my new album. But I wanted people to understand the spiritual battle that it was to get to that point. Because so many times we brag about the results, but we don't actually tell people the darkest days that it took to get to that point. And so I just wanted it to be really real. And I just was able to talk with so many people that were really impacted by that and really dedicated their lives after that message back to God, and how they wanted to come back to the things of God because they had been living in confusion or depression or just even suicidal thoughts, and so it's really about living in victory with God. And sometimes that means that you will have to go through a lot of suffering. So I brought in the example of divine suffering, what it means when God allows suffering, why does he allow it, and what are the rewards of suffering after we go through that. So it was really impactful, and I couldn't have been happier with the results, honestly. And I'm thinking about doing it again, probably.
That would be fantastic. I'd love to see that. But I'm honestly kind of like what you've talked about on that tour is a big thing. I'd love to dig into a little bit too as we kind of go through the conversation. But
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting enough, last time we've had an interview together and on the record, all kind of cool and official like. But the kidney transplant was relatively new. Relatively, right? It was 2019, so it's closer than
Yeah.
it was today, at least. But
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think
yeah.
at that point, I was already scheduled for surgery. I was actually supposed to have it in May, and I had a
Oh wow.
complication that pushed it back to June, which it was even a miracle to just get a June date, because these things are really scheduled in advance. But I guess somebody else in June had dropped their transplant date as well. And if you have a living donor, it's a lot easier to do that. Of course, with deceased donors, you don't have an option. They're going to give it to somebody else if you can't make it.
Yeah.
But at that point, my mom was actually my kidney donor, and so yeah, I was definitely going through it at that point. I have no idea what
Oh
we
yeah.
talked about, but my mind was a mess, and that
Yeah.
month, absolutely.
Well, we appreciate you coming anyways at the time, but man, I tell you what, you've had probably one of the more interesting experiences just overall, right? Because my first experience in getting to meet you, right, that's a fun conversation in and of itself, because the first time I actually met you was when I hosted a concert with you guys in
St. Louis.
2016. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that was Ilya. That was Ilya
yes,
time, right? So that was at the
yeah,
time that tour was specifically it was Ilya, Random Hero, and Viridia, and I think it was kind of like a co-headlining split between Random Hero and Viridia, but
correct.
which was really cool because for me, I got to know a little, I got to hang out with Ilya a little bit a couple years before under some of the previous members, so it was kind of cool to come back and see that again this time with you kind of in the front of that, and it was a neat experience to see it and then get to meet you, because I think you're probably one of my favorite members of the band. Don't tell them that. But I mean,
Thank you.
it was so neat because like you're just one of the most friendliest people, and just so great to get to talk to. And like it's always interesting with artists, especially before a show, you guys are always like trying to get in that right headspace and get your mind clear and get ready for the show. And a lot of times it's hard to kind of get to know somebody in that space, but you know, even in that time, like you're just so friendly and willing to just have that great conversation. So I was like, it was fantastic, right?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah,
But
that tour was really that was like the beginning of everything. Of
it
just like
really
literally,
was. What?
it
So
really
talk
changes.
about that. What? How was that the beginning
Yeah,
of everything? There's a
yeah.
cool story
Well,
behind that, but I'll let you tell it.
sure. Well, you're probably referencing to that was the tour where I met my now husband, right, Patrick. And so it was really funny because that night, I remember in St. Louis, I noticed that like every time I spoke, Patrick would like get really quiet and listen. And I just thought that was interesting. And I was like, does he like me? I was like, nah, dude, he don't, nah, that's ridiculous. Cause like I had actually seen him a whole year before I actually met him. And he was on my radar as a single woman. I was like, that guy's on my radar for sure. But I never approached him because I was like, that's weird. But I had no idea we were going to end up on a tour with them. That night, I had been scoping him out, but again, I don't make first moves, man. I don't do that. But that day I realized that he was giving me some sort of attention and I was like, interesting. So I was just observing it. But the following nights is when, it started becoming a little more obvious and we would hang out and, I would notice that I think we played a show at a festival in Michigan and Ilya was like on a tiny stage. Whereas Random Hero had this really dope stage that they were playing on, but he actually came out to the tiny stage just to watch us, even though he had already seen our band like multiple times on the tour at that point. So I thought it was really strange that he was doing that. And then we were actually talking about this recently. I guess he joined our band Prayer before we hit stage that day, and we actually held hands like laced fingers instead of just like holding hands. And I'm like, wait, why did we do that? So it was like these little tiny things just leading up to like, hey, I like you. I think I like you. So it was just funny, but I would catch on to these cues that he would do, and of course I would reciprocate them because I liked him back. So yeah, but St. Louis was the first day I noticed something was up. So that's funny you bring it up. But yeah, we're married now, so that's great. Everything turned out right in that department. But no, I mean, I think that tour just really a lot of stuff was going on behind the scenes with Ilya. Ilya was actually catching a lot of momentum at that point.
Yeah.
And we had been in the studio, and it's kind of weird for me to talk about knowing how it all ended up because it's like
Sure.
I now have a taste of the industry. I've seen really ugly things in the industry that just my younger self had no idea that could even be possible, especially in Christian industry. But just
Oh gosh.
it was kind of the beginning of dynamics changing in the band because I realized that I liked this guy, and this guy had Patrick had a lot of wisdom on being in bands. I mean, he had a lot of experience. Not saying that my bandmates didn't, but they had only been in one, mostly one serious band, where he had been in a couple serious bands before Random Hero that were very close to breaking. So I would be talking with him obviously because we ended up dating very, very shortly after that. But just I started to kind of hear a business perspective from somebody else, where I started to see kind of some things that the way the band was running may not have been helping us. And so there was always kind of a weird power struggle there. I don't really know why. I don't understand why to this day. But I think it just has something to do with, hey, our singer is getting more attention. She's, really good. People know us now by our singer. And that must have been a little uncomfortable for them because they had been a pre-existing band for quite some time. So the dynamics were starting to change, and I don't know if there was insecurity or something, but it really changed when I started. Every time I dated a guy, it was weird. It was just like uncomfortable for me to talk about because I don't think it was very encouraged for me to date because for some reason people thought that would take my focus off the band, which made no sense to me because like I would literally in 2016 was gone like almost 10 months that year on tour. So I'm like, that's a lot. So like, how am I not dedicated? Like, I don't understand. And every time I seem to date a person, it seems like uncomfortable or there's tension about it. And this time was extra bad because everybody saw that we were really falling very fast for each other, which of course is concerns, you don't want your singer to get hurt and you don't want, I guess, like a messy breakup to happen, but a lot of that animosity was really unnecessary because the band that he was in was doing better than us. So why wouldn't we want that help? Why wouldn't we want that wisdom? And just kind of like really seeing the shows we would play on that tour, because we played some really dope festivals and we started making a lot of headway, and started really like gaining momentum. And I do attribute it a lot to Random Hero kind of just like helping us out, which there's no shame in that. But anyway, I guess just like loyalties were kind of shifting or something, or that's what they thought, when that was not the case. And then just some financial decisions, and then also some managerial decisions were, that summer was kind of the beginning of a lot of that. And so it was literally that tour was a point where everything started to change. And it's kind of like what you ask yourself, is this guy of God or is he of the devil? Because there's no in between, because, me meeting this guy caused this huge fallout, and all we wanted to do was just be together. But all of a sudden there's this new dynamic happening that is making people insecure or something like that, thinking that like I'm going to leave or something, which like I never, ever wanted to leave the band. That was never what I wanted. But also the managers that we had at that point in Ilya were doing, in my opinion, just more damage than they were good. A lot of just backbiting and private phone calls that were really obviously about me. And I didn't appreciate that, because I'm like, hey, I'm right here. Like, we can talk. What is the issue? And just a lot of my loyalty was coming into question, and I had no idea why, because all I did was start dating a guy that I really liked. But he was in the music industry. So for whatever reason, that made people uncomfortable. And so after that, we did one more tour in Ilya, and that tour wasn't financially the greatest, because we didn't really stick up for ourselves in that department. So these were things that were being told to us that like we should do, but like, my band wouldn't. And so like it was confusing for me, because I'm like, I'm seeing a successful band, I'm dating the drummer, I know their inner workings, I know how they're making it and getting bigger and bigger, but for some reason my band is not listening to that advice, or they are scoffing at it. So it was just this, I don't know, egos happen when you start becoming successful, or loyalties change, and then all of a sudden I find myself where my loyalty is being questioned to the point, to like ridiculous points. And then all of a sudden I am getting let go in a text message. It's just like, how did that happen? How did we get to this point? Like,
Right.
So it was really painful. But I'm so glad that Pat was actually there with me to kind of see that. And it's funny because he actually kind of called it. He was like, listen, I just get a feeling that like something's not right in your band, and you need to be prepared in case loyalties change, basically. And I was like, no way, dude, that's never gonna happen. Those are my best friends. They would like never do that to me. And they did. So, I'm not here to bash them at all. I've forgiven them. Like, we've actually talked since then, and really, for like 4 hours, just kind of, I guess, really just, I don't want to say made up, but kind of just like put it to rest.
Yeah.
So and that's what we were kind of saying before, is just like bad things happen, but good can come out of it. So ended up just going solo after that. And unfortunately, right around the time that Ilya and I parted ways, I found out I had a genetic kidney disease, and that I was going to lose my kidney function in a couple years. So it was really overwhelming. It was a really, really tough time in my life, but a lot of good came out of it. And now I've been operating as Zahna since like 2017, and continuing and just being successful on my own, and being really happy about all the creative decisions I get to make. And it's definitely a lot easier not being in a band, because you don't have to ask permission all the time. You just do what you want to do, and you're going to reap the consequences of it being good or bad. So I really like it, because I've had some good success. So great.
Absolutely. I mean, heck, your first solo release was just, that thing did fantastic, especially just coming out of nowhere like that. It was well written. It sounded great. The visuals were always great. The music video, like you put that together well. And, there was definitely a gap between that first and the second most recent album. But honestly, I think there's good reason for it, right? There's a lot going on, but
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I want to talk about that most recent album, right? Because there's a gap between those, and because there's a lot going on. But that most recent album was kind of interesting, because really it was you. That was you. That was all you. That's independent. I know you have to work with some really cool people to put that together, but that was you. That is your sound. We can spend some time talking about, just all how you would end up getting like there's a lot of different sounds there. There's a lot. It sound, and I'd love to talk
Yeah.
about some of the influences of that, but I want to kind of talk about the theme of that album because I think that's a huge part of your story, and I'd love to hear some about that. Right? Because
Yeah, absolutely.
there's a
Well, I
theme
will
that's
say,
come. So
yeah, I will say that the Ilya EP was also me too, actually. So yeah, a lot of people don't know that, but I actually wrote that album with some of my friends and my producer in San Antonio, and Ilya pretty much licensed it. So they're actually not on that record. That's not them.
oh wow.
So a lot of those songs I wrote when I was like 16, 17, and then I ended up tracking them when I was about to turn 21. And then about when I was 21 and a half is when I actually joined Ilya. So my whole arrangement with that deal was, hey, I have this EP. If you guys want to license it, I can also come in and be your singer, and we can just be a band after that. So it is all me essentially. For Red for War though, that was my first debut album with Zahna, and there's some things I think I definitely would have changed. Just some of the it was a label release, so there are some things in the mix that I really would have changed. I would have liked to change. But it was my first song, Underneath, was the first single I released in 20 in it's funny, the day I released my first debut single was 7/7/17, so it was July 7th of 2017,
Oh
and it
wow.
ended up hitting number 4 on Billboard Christian rock charts. And that was just crazy because it had been only about 6 months since Ilya and I parted ways, and just because I think I was just really messed up from it. And I'm a Latina, so I have a lot of rage. And I was like, I'm just going to write an album. And at the same time, I was going through my diagnosis where it took them about 6 months to also diagnose me. So they knew I had to do something with my kidneys because of my labs. But like I remember I was so low. I was very low Christmas and January of 2017. That was probably at my lowest because I had so much rage about everything that happened, how it happened with my band. And then also I spent my birthday in a hospital getting a biopsy on my kidneys for some freaking illness that came out of nowhere. So it really felt like it was, I don't know, like spiritual almost, because I talked actually about this on my tour where I literally had like the worst phobia of hospitals and needles and IVs and stuff. And like, what are the chances that I have this random genetic illness that I didn't even know that is finally taking a toll on my body, and they're trying to figure out what it is. And it seemed too perfect. Like it was like, okay, my dreams are ripped away from me, and now my health is going to get ripped away from me. And that's kind of the whole reason I wrote the album called Red for War, is because I felt like I was waging war on my dreams again, waging war to live, to survive. So Red for War, I chose the color red because it was really petty, actually. My old manager forced me to like dye my hair some random color and or try to dye it, and I didn't want to, but I did it because he told me to, and I just like randomly picked a color, red, and I kind of just used that red color to embody like everything I was feeling, which was bleeding and war and rage, but love too, because I had such a deep love, which is why I was so much in pain. I had so much love for these people that is why I was bleeding so much, and then also physically bleeding because of my condition. So yeah, it was kind of, I had to embody this soldier-esque type of person to really fight for what I wanted, and what I thought my purpose was. And so that whole year I was writing a new album, and the first single was, like I said, released in July and did incredibly well. And then I was actually getting really impatient and frustrated because my producer Bertrand was taking too long. And so it ended up all working out, though, because January of 2018 is when I got a label offer. And then we decided to go ahead and go with them and release the full album on that. So yeah, I definitely, I don't despise that step that I took. I think it was the right decision for that time. However, I will say I'm really happy being independent again. And I just feel like this last record is really just the beginning of what I'm able to do now. So yeah, everything was kind of messy along the way, but here we are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean that album was probably one of my most played albums for a while, just because it it was just that good,
Thank you. Thank you
I,
so much.
and part of the thing is like sometimes those challenges and the hurt can, I feel like it tends to inspire the best art. um
Yeah.
and i I could hear the passion of whatever was going on through that, and it just, I think it just pushed it that much further. um
Yeah. I had a lot of pain to process. And so it was really good. It was kind of just a new evolving. And honestly, that was more like training wheels. Like all that suffering was really just training wheels for like the next album Suffering, because that one, it made it look like playground play to me, like for what the next part of my life was going to be. So I truly believe like God let me have a lot of wins. But again, this is kind of what I talked about on my public speaking tour, is like, divine suffering. What does it mean when the heavens allow you to be tested to every fiber of your being? And so it's just crazy to see that I thought that that was so bad. And then I finished that album cycle and then had my kidney transplant and then went through absolute hell for like 4 years. And I'm now barely getting out of that, but it was literally just some of the worst stuff I've experienced. But again, it goes into the album, and we're not there yet on the story, but yeah, basically after it's just a lot, man.
right,
but
right.
but yeah, Red for War was awesome. It did its thing. It kind of established me as a solo artist, so I definitely don't regret a lot of the things I did for that album at the time. Unfortunately, just the way I was able to market it was very limited because my health took such a downturn quite quickly after that album happened. So yeah, that's kind of where the rest of the story kind of falls into play for the
Yeah.
next album, Stronger Than Death.
Yeah, and so in between that, right, you ended up kind of stepping away from the record label deal, and there's there's always stuff that goes on with that, but I think you got the opportunity to kind of go independent, and honestly, maybe that was the right thing at the right time, right? Because with all everything else that kind of goes on that falls in this next part of the story, is it gave you time to have control of your situation and do what was right for you at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was just unfortunate, like I said, because the marketing for Red for War really didn't get a full shot because I was so ill and I wasn't able to tour. But essentially, that album, Red for War, released August of 2018, and I had my kidney transplant June of 2019. So I didn't even get a full year to really promote it, which was really unfortunate because I could have done a lot more with that. But unfortunately, my health just really declined very quickly. Me and Patrick got married in October of 2018, and right in January of 2019 is when I really started feeling a downturn in my health. Like I physically started feeling different. Because kidneys are really resilient. Like you may even have kidney damage and you don't even know it because they're just really resilient, and you don't actually feel sick, like really sick, until they're like almost failing or like completely
Wow.
failed. So that's when they really took a nosedive and started to, which actually I'm very grateful because I just missed the pandemic mark when all these hospitals were stopping surgery. So I was actually really fortunate. It took a rapid decline because nobody could have predicted the pandemic. Nobody
Oh
was going to know
gosh,
about
no.
that. Yeah, so that's the pandemic just affected so much, obviously, for musicians. But there was just an extra layer of difficulty for me because I was already immunocompromised because of my transplant and had to take immunorejection meds. I'm sorry, anti-rejection meds, which basically just lower your entire immune system, where so that your body doesn't wake up to the fact there's a foreign organ inside of you, because then your body will just attack it as a disease and then it'll reject. So those pills I have to take for the rest of my life, but they do subsequently also lower my immune system so I can get any sickness much easier. Yeah, finally, after my transplant, it took me about 6 months to really feel good and start recovering. And then I had a tour planned out for March of 2020, and I was 4 dates into it until everything got shut down. And it was really hard because I had just dumped like 20 grand into touring, or probably more than that actually, for a van, trailer, and equipment that I needed. And everything shut down for touring for 2 years, and I'm like, bro, how am I gonna pay for this?
Right.
And I'm still basically a newlywed too. And we already had Pat and I had a really good 4 months of honeymoon bliss of marriage before everything went south, just with the pandemic and the record label and everything. And I just really don't recommend starting a marriage with that many crises. Okay. Like, it was rough.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that, because you're already learning how to be, one, financially independent, two, like learning your partner, and three, like, just like you want to live in peace so that you can focus on how to be a better spouse. And it's just like, well, when the rug is pulled from under you with financial problems, with health problems, like I remember, like, my health premiums would crush me every month. Like, my health insurance was just so much of my living expense, and then my medications are really expensive too. And so it was just really hard to start, to be a married couple. So, there was really hard times in our marriage where, there's a lot of fear, and you're like, oh man, did I marry the right person? This is really hard. I didn't think it was gonna be this hard. But when you have to step back and realize that, like, a lot of that is just stress. It's just, it's not really you guys. It's not you guys in your best state as it is. And, that was
Right.
kind of where my husband, Patrick, and his band Random Hero were also having a lot of internal problems and just really struggling. So it was just, everything was kind of just crapping out. But I remember just, I had a lot of pain manifesting because, I'd seen so much garbage in the industry at this point, and just, it was so triggering, it was just so triggering to just see the same crap over and over. And, I was like, you know what, I just don't want to do this anymore. Like, I want to be in music, but I really just want to do this independently because, one, I need to see returns. I definitely need to see returns to keep my business sustainable. But it was just, it was so much. It was just so much. So that, with the financial burden of, just buying all this tour rig, plus wanting to pay for a new album to record and keep that momentum going, I just had so many challenges to kickstart it up again. And so throw into mix being a newlywed, throw into mix financial problems, throw into the mix, like, industries that are shutting down. It was a lot. And, so I was just, it's crazy though, because that year really, really, really showed me, a lot of what the subject matter of this new album was going to be like. And, Stronger Than Death is basically my whole epiphany of what it's like to confront death and your own mortality and what you do with that. And ultimately, if you listen to the album, it starts with, kind of like this cocky attitude of like, hey, I've got this. This is my calling. I can do this. There's all this like heavy rock that's, proud. And not saying you can't be proud of what you do, but really, as you go through the album, you start to see like, wow, this is getting really, really hard. The lyric material, the lyrical subjects start to change into like a different tone of defeat. And you're like, wow, maybe I can't do this. Maybe I'm not the chosen one, but as you get more and more into the album, the attitudes of the songs just keep changing, and you're finally coming to the realization that, hey, this was never about me. This is, I'm stronger than death because Christ defeated death. Like, yeah, my kidney could reject right now, or I could die because of complications right now. But you know what? It doesn't matter, because I already have victory. Like, death is victory when you're in Christ, and it's like, greater is he in me than he that is in the world. Like, the world is an absolute mess around me. My world is a mess around me, but I don't fear death because I know that he is with me. So it's kind of this whole catharsis of an album where you start with one attitude and you end up in this other attitude of, hey, time is short. Like, you got to live for the dream. And if everything matters, but at the same time, it doesn't, because Christ already wins. So that burden is off of you. That burden of death is off of you, and just live as if it's your last day. So Die for Something is really the song on the album where that attitude starts to come into play. And then the rest of the album is really victorious, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it just felt different, and you could hear all of that through that album, and it really, really is a fantastic album. I think you've done fantastic work on that, and I mean, just to hear that story is just amazing. Especially all the things you've been through and are going through, and to still be able to put that out. It's just it's amazing.
It was definitely quite the endeavor, because in theory everybody wants to put out great music, but the reality is it just costs so much money. Like, it just costs a couple, like, tens of thousands of dollars. I'll just put it there. But yeah, like, I mean, I had to do that independently, like, without a label like that. I didn't have that money, so I relentlessly worked for 3 years to come up with that money. To the point where like I almost killed myself working. Like I remember me coming back to work was just like my body was so exhausted. Like I lost so much muscle mass because of my transplant. Like I was in a really rough shape and I probably shouldn't have been working that much, but I had to because that dream of this album, doing it independently, and setting up for sustainability, it's always better to be independent if you're looking for sustainability. So anyway, I, stuff really started to turn around this year when I released that album, and just the immense amount of growth, like from the first album to this one, man, like it's like quadrupled.
Oh gosh,
And
yes.
I just, oh, it's just insane to see the growth, but we did it right. And it just took a long time. But, now the world is better. The state, well, somewhat better. Music industry is better. Not the world. I don't think the world's better at all. But it was some of the hardest work I've ever done in my life. However, I'm seeing how much it paid off. So I'm really excited for the future. And I've just been so blessed to be able to be in a position where, I'm a voice teacher now. I get to help people find their voice. I get to assist people wanting to be in the music industry and put out original music. I've got some credits coming out with some bands I've worked with next year. So I'm really excited because I'm able to take this experience and pour into other people and guide other people that have a lot to say in the perspective of Christ. So I really am passionate about developing artists that have that attitude that they're doing it for God.
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that I always look to do myself, right? Because I pretend like I know how to play drums, so I'm not really somebody that's been playing any band anywhere. Um, and my passion has always been I just love the music, right? Um,
Yeah.
I was a homeschooled pastor's kid, so I listened to Christian music. That's evolved over the years because it started with, well, Christian music was what you would hear on the K-Loves or such stations and whatnot. And I started to figure out, hey, it's Christian music can be heavy.
Yeah,
And I kind of started to
absolutely.
evolve with that, right? So like at first I had to kind of get past that, like that, is this okay? But once you get past that, it's like, oh my gosh, it's also good. So I've always been passionate about it. And
Mhm.
I'm a pastor's kid, and um, I've always had ministry ingrained in my nature, right? I've lived
Yes.
it, I've breathed it. I've done just about anything you can imagine ministry at some point, and so I wanted to combine those two things, and it says, okay, well, how do I get to do that? And I don't
Yeah.
have money, and I don't know how access to venues like I used to. I don't get to do shows, so I can't book
Uh-huh.
shows.
Uh-huh.
I don't have a radio show or anything like that. I can't put you on the radio. Can't do that. What
Mhm.
can I do? Like, well, I just love having conversations, right? And so it's
Yeah.
funny. So most people don't know this. So um, this whole thing for me started way back in 2007.
Uh-huh.
um, I've always been passionate about Christian music, so I've always had something to do about it, and I always love telling other people about it. And it started when I was homeschooled, and I was the high school age. And at the time, I was in this little homeschool cooperative where a bunch of the homeschool families in the area got together and, would do classes together once a week. And, well,
Mhm.
with any kind of school type thing, that they decided to do a little newspaper that the students would kind of put together and stuff. And nobody
Nice.
really had anything to contribute. I'm like, I know, I will put Christian music stuff in it. So I started
Oh,
going
that's
out, and
awesome.
I would put in like this little section about here's the newest albums that have come out. Okay, yeah, that was kind of cool. And I called it the Christian
Yeah.
Music Source. That was my little segment, my little section of that thing, the
Oh.
Christian Music Source.
Uh-huh.
And that kind of grew from there. And if that I left that homeschool group, and I'm like, well, I kind of like it. I started a Facebook page. That Facebook
Mhm.
page kind of grew, and it I got to just do the same thing on that Facebook page. I started just posting about bands that I liked.
Yeah.
There was plenty of other places doing it. Jesus for Hideouts, a new release today, and
Uh-huh.
all of that. But for me, I was just passionate about the music, and I was just sharing it, and it kind of
Yeah.
grew, and you know, and
Awesome.
it was there was interesting things that came out of it because I started to kind of get to know some of the smaller local bands and then some regional bands and all that kind of thing. And I started like, well, those guys over there don't know those guys over there, and they needed to talk to each other. I think they'd like, and I started at the time, Facebook groups were a little bit different. The time
Uh-huh.
Facebook groups had its own chat feature. I started a
Uh-huh.
group called the Artist Connection Church, and that was the weirdest name, and I was trying my best. But all it was designed to do is I would let in people that I knew were good Christian artists. I'd be
Uh-huh.
very selective about it, make sure they were artists, and maybe some like people that were involved in the industry, like radio or booking people, because the idea
Uh-huh.
was is I wanted people to get to know each other and build a community where they could have connection and just be real with each other, and they have that thing in common. And then sometimes that might bring them that connection where they could work together and further what they're doing, and maybe even
Uh-huh.
connect with people in other areas and reach markets they couldn't before. And that
Yeah.
got to grow a little bit, and um, some cool people got to know each other, and through that I started getting other people introduced. So some other artists bringing other people, and I ended up meeting getting this guy in there. His name was Scotty. At
Uh-huh.
the time, was the manager for Random Hero, and I was like, "Oh, I know that
Oh yeah,
band."
Scotty. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Right, right. And I got to know. I'm like, I know that band because I was a music fan, and in the area at the time was a Christian music festival called Agape Fest, and
Uh-huh.
they brought in Random Hero once. They loved it. Random Hero had just released this brand new EP, and so
Mm-hmm.
this is like one of the first big shows at the EP at this festival, and they bring out the former guitarist for Skillet, Ben Cassica, who played
That's right.
guitar with them on one of the songs, and I was like, and I was a huge Skillet fan. That was my thing at the time, right? I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever, and so I'm like, and so I got to really enjoy Random Hero, and then the next year they were back again, and and I got to know them over the time, so they got to know me a little bit, and
Oh, I lost
so it
you.
was kind of
Are you
cool how
there?
all that built up, and as time went on, I started doing like I started like maybe I should interview people, so I started interviewing bands. Some of them are just absolutely terrible and all of that. My first ever interview, believe it or not, my first ever interview um, was actually the band I Am Terrified. I don't know if you remember them at all.
Yes. Yeah, I listened to their EP in high school. I really liked it.
Right? And that was what I'm a high school kid standing there in the middle of a field behind some stage next to their RV holding a voice recorder trying to talk to this band, and I don't know what to ask or what to say. Um, but it was kind of fun, and I never actually did anything with it. I don't even have the file anymore. I kind of regret it because that would have been kind of cool. But
Yeah,
then,
man.
right, so some of my first interviews was with Random Hero. Those are the first interviews I posted and things like that. But it's a long way of going about it. It's like this is what my passion was, and this is kind of what's gotten me to realize is this is what my ministry can be, right?
Yeah,
Being that passionate
absolutely.
fan turned into, well, you guys need help, and I've built my own little natural audience, which is not not a huge audience, mind you, but I think just having a conversation, just talking about what you have going on, and I love what this has turned into. Right, that's how we got to where we are, and
Uh-huh.
how this brand turned from the Christian music source, which kind of died off because life got busy. I got married, well, you
Oh,
get married,
yes.
life gets busy,
Yes.
right? And
It
so
definitely does.
I got married and things got busy, and it kind of fell to the wayside. But I've just always been passionate about it, and I'm like, what do I do with this thing? I want to keep doing it, but how do I do it? And I'm like, let's do a podcast. And it took me forever. I've been talking to Patrick about this at Kingdom Come for like the last 2 years. Finally, I
Uh-huh.
come through with it, but um,
Yes. That's
eh,
great.
the whole thing here is just having these conversations, and I want to tell your guys the story. And my hope is that people get to hear your story and get to be impacted by that. Um, and there's been so many amazing stories that have come out of this is episode 5 of the 5 episodes that I've had. There's been so many amazing stories from all different walks. If you guys who are listening, if you haven't gone and checked out some of the other episodes, go do it. Right, I've had some of the most interesting guests. Right, we've had D Swan, who's EDM. How he got to where he is was completely a God thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Becca was next, right? And you know Becca's story quite well,
I
so for those that
do.
haven't heard it, go listen. It's just as amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I talk
Absolutely.
to Cindy Blankenship.
Uh
You
huh.
want to talk about an amazing story? Whew, man, like it started
I
with the
need to
bowl of
ask her about
pudding.
that. Yeah.
Go check that episode out, because we spent probably an hour just going through it, and like some of the experiences she's gotten to have, and it really it all tied together so well. And her story about being in the mothership, right? That how she
Yeah.
got that name is great. And then the last episode was with Jamie Krasinski of 13 Minutes. And some of
Right.
the
Yeah.
experience
Jamie
he's
came
had.
out to our show in Oklahoma for the
Oh
Unexpected
my
tour. He was
gosh,
speaking to her.
he had
Yeah.
so
He
many
really
good things to
enjoyed
say
it.
about that. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's
Um,
awesome.
but and it's so good to kind of bring you back into this, because we got a chance to talk when I was still just kind of having a little interviews and trying to figure out what I was doing and all that, and to come here and have this format and talk about some of these stories is just amazing.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you just kind of sharing all of that. I know that's had such a huge impact in your life, and um, it just says so much about everything you've gone through, and you can still stand strong. And it says that what, God is still there even through all of that. God is still there through all of that.
Yeah, no,
But
absolutely. I think the Unexpected tour was really good to kind of just top it off. And again, I might do it again because this album isn't even a year old yet. I released it in February of 2023. And I have already the direction somewhat of the next album I want to do. So it just takes time. But man, the workload was so much and I'm cool to chill for a little bit. But Patrick, who is now in Nesdum as the
oh yeah,
solo artist Nesdum, his album should be slated for release for spring next year. So I'm really excited for that, and that's kind of my next big project. While I go ahead and still kind of release a couple music videos for this album cycle. But I'm getting excited to go back to the studio hopefully next year, maybe late next year, and start writing some new stuff and see how that all goes.
oh, that's exciting. So he's going to be a one I'm trying to get an interview with too, because we've talked about that. He's like, we Kingdom Come. He's like, oh yeah, you get that thing going, man. I will be your first podcast. But we'll get there. We'll get there. But
We'll get there. Absolutely.
I'm excited because I it was funny. I don't know if you noticed, but I was the first person that has interviewed him.
Really?
Yeah. It was.
Oh my
funny.
gosh, that's awesome.
It was midnight in a parking lot in downtown St. Louis after a show, so it was kind of a fun thing. But so it'll be kind of fun to bring that one full circle a little bit. But I want to take a second, kind of shift gears a little bit, and kind of talk about some of the stuff I've been having some of these conversations lately about the Christian music industry, right? So that has been a very interesting, especially in the last. I mean, it's always an interesting topic because of just what it is. We say the Christian music industry. It's like it's always been its own unique beast. It's got its stigmas, it's got its good things, it's got its bad things, and it brings me something. I always come back around to it because it's always interesting to hear everybody's different takes on that, and the good, the bad, and otherwise, And so I guess the first place I always like to start with that with anybody is like, what does that even mean to you? What Christian music? What does that mean to you? Like, is that really like, what is that? What is that for you?
Well, for me, the Christian music industry, all it is really like an alliance, I guess. I think that, movements are sparked by small alliances that happened between artists or whatever. And so to me, I think the Christian music industry is really just kept alive by the fans and the alliances that bands make together, because they're the ones that tour together. So really the Christian music industry is also the radio stations who choose to only play artists that are specifically Christian. To me, though, I mean, you got to think of it kind of from a religious perspective, because these Christian events have certain standards. And so, to me, any festival is the same. I just get booked at Christian ones a lot more often because I'm more circulated in that circuit. I'm played more on the radio stations because I am more outspoken about my faith. And I think it just depends on the mission statement of the band, like what they're actually trying to do. For me, I don't think of it as like being a Christian artist needs to be so militant. I think that you can just live your life and just explain things you've been through. And I mean, I am a Christian, so I'm gonna write some Christian songs because that's an overflow of who I am. So, it's like when people make it weird and like put up all these lines of like Christian secular, like they're just wanting certain standards for their life, which I completely respect, because I was a younger Christian at one point, and I solely listened to Christian music as I was being discipled, in the church to become closer to God. So I see why people have those standards, and I'm totally for it if that's what they want. To me though, I'm just going to be an artist, and out of the overflow of what I am, I'm going to write. And I'm kind of realizing my responsibility with that, because I can give more effort and messaging in my music of negativity, because I have a lot of negative emotions. But I'm trying to understand my responsibility of the sound that I'm putting out in the world. And I have some very dark songs that are really, really tragic parts of myself that I'm trying to reconcile. And sometimes the only way to do that is to write a song. But really, the Christian music industry to me is just bands that always tour together, that are openly about God. They play festivals that are put on by churches, which have ministry purposes behind them. So in that case, yeah, I believe there's a Christian music industry. But other than that, there's a whole world out there that also needs like ministry too. But I just feel that the best ministry is to live your life for God and tell people about what happens in your life and how God uses your life and works in you. So that's why I love doing interviews, because I am able to share the deep parts. That's why I do public speaking, because I'm able to really share the really like parts that like can't be told in 5 minutes on stage. So I'm really about them, because that is a mission field to me. As long as I am open about my weaknesses, God can work in that.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you do because of that, right? Because you're very open about your struggles and all of that, and it's gonna reach people, and probably reach people that wouldn't have been reached by anybody else. You've got so many unique opportunities, and that's part of the thing too. Is like I'm a huge supporter of the Christian music industry. I think we just spend a whole lot of time talking about that, but I'm also very particular about supporting the Christian music industry, in that I'm trying to support ministry, not
Correct.
industry, but ministry.
Correct, yeah.
Right? And that, and I've said this a couple episodes ago, but I'm going to be clear about this. That doesn't mean I'm going to support somebody necessarily that is just in the Christian music world. Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to support somebody that's a ministry, and so sometimes you're going to hear somebody come on here that's not a traditional Christian artist, but they're doing ministry, right?
Right.
And I'm going to support
right.
anybody that's doing that, because the reality is it takes all kinds, because
Mm-hmm.
they're going to reach somebody that you and I can't, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also going to be specifically focusing on somebody that's involved in ministry, and they're real about it, right? Because
Right.
I want to put what I have to give, what little platform I have, because this isn't about me, it's about the ministry. And so I'm going to put or who I'm supporting, somebody that deserves to be supported, right? It's tricky to talk, but it's because it's not about
Definitely.
it's not about what they're doing, it's about what they're doing for God. But I want to support those that are really in it for the right reasons. So
Absolutely. And I mean, there is a standard too. Like I wish that, the overall standard, for Christian music is highest, because that is, the sound that you're putting out in the world that lures people to the understanding of who God is needs to be impeccable. Like, that's
absolutely.
why the industry is there though, because these people need to get paid, the people that are creative, the people that have the knowledge of how to record, like all that stuff. So it's really hard. It's kind of a fine line you have to ride, but I think that if you focus on Christ in your personal life, in the things that are the most intimate parts of you, out of the overflow of that, you will conduct yourself with integrity, hopefully. And I'm not saying just be like the what is it, the cookie cutter Christian. Like I'm not
absolutely.
a cookie cutter Christian.
Oh gosh,
I'm a little dark. I'm a little dark.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just, it's truth. Like I will definitely be open about what God has done in my life, even though I have tattoos and I look a certain way. but that in itself is its own ministry, because you are an example that you can be a Christian and still retain part of your soul and not like become just a factory produced, like, oh, we don't cuss, smoke, drink, or dance, like that. Like, we're not here to live as
Mm-hmm.
zombies. Like, we're real people who have had supernatural experiences with the one true God, and we're here to tell you about him, that you need to give your life to him, because he all the things that you're in pain about, like, you come to him and you begin a relationship with him. And I mean, that was just why the Unexpected tour was so amazing, because you get to talk about that part. You get
Oh
to
yeah.
talk about the encounters with the real living God that you've had. And people are looking for God. They're looking for him. They think that there's a surface level, that's why they're turned off by church. But why I love to bring him into my music and into the message while I'm performing, because you can worship God anywhere. So I think it's really important to just simply be an authentic Christian, and out of the overflow of what you do, that will be evident if you're about it, for sure.
Absolutely. Know them by their fruit, right? So that's the interesting part about the industry, and is there's a lot of great artists out there that have really got the most amazing hearts and do it for the right reasons. But
Uh-huh.
just like anything, there are those that are doing it for the money, right? And you can't tell. I mean, honestly, you really can't tell. You can't tell who's in it for the money and who's in it for the ministry, and it's so hard to reconcile those things and tell this. But I'll tell you this: I think it's so hard for me to just like top what Jamie said on the last episode, but he nailed this so well, right? Because we end up going down this road and start having these conversations about Under Oath and
Uh-huh.
Tim Lambesis and some of the and all of those things, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's been a big struggle in the industry, or people's perspectives of the industry. It's either Christian people, or Christian music is either it's not well done, it's cheap sounding or whatever, or it's the other side. Well, all the good sounding Christian music ends up just hiring a hiring somebody to kill their wife. But it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he said this so well, and it's when we talk about these things, it's important to remember this. It's and I'm not going to do them justice. Just go listen to the episode. But was what they were saying before whatever it was happened, was that not true? Just because of
Correct.
who said it and what they did later, does that change what they said? Does that not make what they said still true? You can
Right.
speak truth, and that kind of brought some interesting perspective to the conversation, and I think that just rings a bell to say, hey, you know what? We all make mistakes. Be careful. Do not judge others.
Mm-hmm.
Judge yourself. Don't judge others.
Yeah,
And
that's a good way to look at it. I mean, like, honestly,
yeah, for
like, the
real.
industry is such a monster. Like, I don't even know if those bands were just forced to say they were Christian to take advantage of a certain
Oh,
market
sure.
or audience. But you're right. It's just, the Bible even talks about is that, like, not everyone who says Lord, Lord will enter, because it's like you can do all this stuff for a display, and God can still fully use you in spite of you. But that doesn't
Absolutely.
mean you've sat with Christ and you know what it is to be with him even in the darkest times. And that's why the Bible says don't despise discipline, don't despise trials, because stuff blowing up in your face like the Tim Lambesis stuff, as far as I'm concerned, I think he learned a lot through that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't yeah, I think I hope that, like, he has gotten back his priorities with God again, if that's where he was. But I mean, it's just like, you're right. It doesn't make anything else not true. We obviously have fake people in the church, even pastors. Like, it's all the same. It's just false teachers. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you can't chew the meat and spit out the bones, essentially.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
the intent of your heart is important too when you receive things like that. But honestly, like, it also shows us not to follow blindly anybody. Like, we need to like follow God for God, and know in our
Mm-hmm.
hearts and follow Christ for that reason. So it's such a gray area, because there's all types of Christians where some of them are very new in the faith, and
Mm-hmm.
they're extra strict about things. And I've received judgment before for some of the things I do or the way I look like, or I receive judgment because I have a rock on sign on my shirts. But I'm not going to sit here and get mad about that, because I'm glad that a Christian who is more sensitive or perhaps new in the faith, trying to do this the right way, is doing what their conscience tells them to do. And that's
Yeah.
biblical. Paul says we should, not be a stumbling block to others. So it's like, a lot of people just think you have to be perfect as a Christian, but it's like, nah, you just do things out of love. Like if that person isn't comfortable with that, I'm not going to do that or expose them to that or make them feel bad, because they're really trying to get their relationship with Christ in order. And me doing that maybe make them think of their past or make them want to go back to that. So
Yeah.
it's just, you have all kinds of Christians with all different types of sensitivities in different places in their walks with God. But the truth remains is that we're not saved by works. We're saved by the grace only. But out of an overflow of your heart, you will conduct yourself. So that's something that I'm constantly working on myself. I have a lot of things I need to fix in my heart, in my life. And so it's all there in the Bible, really. I mean, the industry is ugly because it's hard to survive in music when you're a small artist. It's actually like I feel like I could make a lot more money in another industry probably, but I wouldn't enjoy it. I wouldn't enjoy it, and I wouldn't feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be either. So, I mean, it's give or take. Everyone's in different places. And of course, be aware and look at the fruit of people. But yeah, we should definitely follow God for God and do as your conscience dictates.
Yeah, and I look at it this way. It's like he's like I said, he said it best. Is just because they did something terrible doesn't mean they didn't still speak the truth. And if somebody you love and look up to does do something terrible, don't judge them, don't disparage them, don't go on and put them on blast. Now's the time to pray for them. If you're going to post about the situation, don't post about what they did. Post about, hey, let's pray for them right now. Let's call attention to them and just like support them even in their worst. Because
I mean, I definitely think there's accountability for sure that needs to happen. And I've come under fire for publicly, calling stuff out. And there is really backward stuff in the industry, like and sometimes I have no guilt about it, because I'm like, no, that person has been doing this for years. They've been operating like this for years, and everyone is too scared to come out and say something. And I just don't care anymore, because had somebody told me a couple things before I did them, I might have saved myself a lot of pain.
Absolutely.
Not saying that maybe I still wouldn't have gone through it, but at least I was warned. And a lot of times people just have to do it themselves and see that that isn't a good person. And that shapes you. That definitely shapes you. So even stuff in my band, even the management team I had, although it was extremely painful, although I wish that, I didn't have to like freaking just get so messed up by that. God, the Bible is still true that God uses everything for the good of those who love him.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
I toughened up a lot, and I'm very grateful for those life lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this a little bit. Let's shift in. We're going to wind down a little bit. I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation, but I've already kept you long enough. It is, but let's shift into one last part of this, right? I've kind of worked our way around this a bit, but let's talk about how to support in these things, right? So I work hard to make sure I put out work with people that are just absolutely amazing ministry minded people. Well, it's hard to make it as a small artist. There's not a lot of good support in the industry, because it's all about those that are going to be out there and helping fund the industry and all that. So as a small artist, how do we support that, right? Like, it's terrible right now, because now we're in 2023, where if you put out music, you're going to have to put it out on Apple Music and Spotify and all of those things, and I'm not going to bother saying pennies, because that's not even true anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a way to do it right. Sure. So, I mean, I develop bands, like I develop artists, like that's my side gig. And I tell them straight up, the thing you're going to need the most of is money, because when you're starting any business, you need to have capital, because you can't do anything without capital. So you need good credit to borrow that capital. And so that is like, if you want to do this industry, you have to have capital. Second, you have to be really actually good at music. You have to actually like be good at your instrument. And that's where a lot of people fail right there. Or people that have really good capital still don't succeed because they're just not that good at their instrument. and they're not that good at writing. And writing is critical. Writing is critical. If you're not writing good songs, it doesn't matter if you have a good voice because no one wants to hear your songs. No one wants to hear you sing.
Absolutely.
And so there's things in the developmental process that have to be correct for you to actually sustain. And if you're not that good of a songwriter, that's okay. That's why the industry exists, is because you hire writers to come in and co-write. That's just the way it is. Or you hire session musicians, or you work a little bit longer on your voice before you record, etc. And so that's just the preliminary thing. But in the way that fans can help, I mean, there's a lot of responsibility on the band. Again, just any band, you're gonna have to have some type of business savvy. As a solo artist, I wear like 10 different hats. I am one day a digital marketer, and the next day I am a pastor. Like I'm a preacher on stage, or one day I am a vocal coach, coaching another singer in the booth while they're recording their album, and the next day I'm in the booth getting roasted by my producer, or whatever. You're in a different city, you're in a different type of environment performing, you're in a festival. So there's so many things of knowledge that you have to have. So when that is correct, which is kind of why I like to be a solo team, because I trust in myself. I trust that I can learn things. I've had to learn live sound, and I don't even like live sound. I hate it, but I had to learn it to do
I
this.
love it. So
Yeah, but in the way, there's digital music, that front, and that's its own thing. And then touring is the big one that is very hard to break through and be successful in, which is why you're seeing the touring landscape change so much. I mean, even big bands are struggling to tour right now, because and you're not really seeing a whole lot of births of new bands coming through to the top. It's becoming increasingly harder to be successful in a commercial industry, which is why you're seeing the rise of so many smaller artists who are kind of working class musicians who maybe aren't the biggest artists in the world, but they're paying their bills. And that to me is more important than being famous, because especially as a woman, like I want to have a family and a house one day. And I know people that are in huge bands that have very little built in their personal assets because they tour so much and they can't really build a family. Like they can't do that. Or they can, but they would have to say goodbye to touring. So to be able to do both would require a lot of work, groundwork, and juggling and knowing stuff and having experience. But in the sense that like how to support these bands who are growing, I mean, the biggest thing is that artists have to have a track record of what they sell. So really you're seeing artists and bands become more of a business that has to generate a certain amount of numbers to be sustainable. And just because a band has a lot of social media followers, that doesn't mean that they're actually selling merch and making money and reimbursing. So, and sometimes they are selling merch, but they're wrapped up in a business deal that their label takes a lot of that money. And so they're still struggling, which is why I'm very much like wary of labels at this point, because what do they even do? What do they even do that you can't go find the team that broke a band, hire them, and then, get your music if your music is good. So there's a lot of steps before fans can really make a difference that the band themselves have to do. Now, if you're already at that point where you're sustainable and you're generating income and you are having and accruing a loyal fan base, the way the fans can help is much, much more efficiently given by one, signing up for Patreon, buying merchandise, and actually going to shows, because that is the numbers they need to prove that to be successful as a band. And just requesting on radio, being a huge fan, talking about this band a lot on social media, pushing links or sharing videos, or a lot of free ways, just generating a buzz. But eventually that buzz has to translate into in-person numbers or financial numbers that make a band look really good to labels that are bigger, that can actually break them through to the next level. So having alliances, having friends, going to shows where you or putting or asking for shows to be put together of two bands that you love. Alliances are extremely important for bands. Just showing up, helping out money financially, because running a business takes a lot of money, and it's the same thing as any other business. You have to have a good product that people want, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I, there's so many shows I'll go listen to a band, I'm like, okay, they're pretty good, and and then I hear that band that comes up. I'm like, that's fantastic. I have no idea who you are, and that's the band I buy everything from. It's like,
Yeah, yeah.
it all works together, So I think that's huge, right? So my personal thing is always says like, look, go to the shows always. It's worth driving 2 hours to go see somebody. They're usually a good artist is putting everything they have into that show. They literally are leaving it all on the table, and
Yeah.
for you, you're not going to want to miss that, right? They're giving something to you that, and they want you to have that, and it's an experience. It's great. Being there alone is a great support, right?
Yeah.
But if you loved what you saw, go buy that. Go
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah.
I joke about this a lot, but like, go grab an old cell phone you got sitting in the closet. Go plug that in. Go play their music on Spotify overnight. Just let that thing roll for a couple weeks.
Oh my gosh, that helps tremendously. That helps tremendously. I don't know if like Spotify flags it or something, but it definitely helps.
Oh gosh,
just
yeah.
getting those stream numbers up for sure.
Yeah, I mean, stream numbers that get you on playlist, all kind. There's so much that gets involved in that, right? But
yeah, just showing up, streaming it, buying merch, and just ticket sales. That's all really important. And Patreon too. Like my Patreon, I don't even have that many people on it, but like, oh my gosh, they're like the 12 disciples, right? They're just the close ones that really know what you're about as an artist and really support you. And so I couldn't be more grateful for my Patreon because that has been such an asset to me. It's a support group that keeps me going. It keeps the money I have cash flow to be able to put out more stuff.
Absolutely.
So yeah, definitely important. And just what you're doing. I think community is really important to you. When you make friends at concerts, you're able to really support as a community, start getting excited, not just for the bands, but to see your friends there. I think that's really important.
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, there's something about this, and I've talked about this a lot, but the Kingdom Come Festival is different because it built a community. I feel like they built the community first and then brought the music in, right? Because it always started with some of the local bands just around there, and they built that community and it just kept growing and growing. But it's like every time I've gone, it's one of the most friendliest and welcoming festivals I've ever been to.
Oh, everyone's family there.
It's not just absolutely everybody's family. It's not just the attendees. It's the artists and the artists with the attendees, because we all are excited to get to see each other again. It's like we haven't seen each other in a year, and it's so good to see you again. And it's amazing the community that's built. And I'm really hoping we start to see that take hold and spread. Yeah. Right? I want to see more of that.
It's that core fan base that just supports all the bands.
And absolutely. And you said your Patreon. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's probably been one of the biggest game changers for an upcoming artist. As you start to build yourself up and get that fan base, you get that Patreon going. Not only does that give you a better connection to them, but it's probably one of the best ways to support you, honestly.
It really is. I mean, I've been considering moving off of Patreon and doing a different platform just because Patreon takes quite a bit of percentage.
Oh, sure. Always.
But, that's a business decision. But it's a trusted brand. But, I mean, regardless, it's just I have people in there that are like, hey, I just want to tithe to you, you're the ministry I want to support. And, man, that puts responsibility on me to continue because these people believe in me enough to, give me their tithe. I don't take that lightly. So it's just amazing to see that the people that really do support you, that you've impacted, one, that's just evidence of you actually making a difference in someone's life, and two, of you actually moving them enough to want to come help you. So that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I all I can say is I appreciate you coming and having this interview with me. It's amazing, and it's so good to get to have these conversations again and just to hear your stories. And I want to, in the future, I want to bring you back in because, we've got a chance to talk a lot about your career and how we got here and all that. But I want to kind of talk a little bit on the other side of some of how you work with artists and what that's about. So I think that's a whole other great topic I'd love to bring you back for. So
Absolutely.
we'll keep them back in mind. But I just want to, I just appreciate you coming and sitting down and having this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Before I drop you off, where do we find you and how do we support you today and right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So ZahnaOfficial.com, that's ZAHNA, ZahnaOfficial.com. or you can just find me Zahna Official on like all my handles for Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. All of them are Zahna Official. And then on Spotify, Apple Music, pretty much everywhere, and then YouTube as well, Zahna Official. So make it nice and easy for everybody.
Fantastic. Go follow, go like, go smash that share button. Just go check it out. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. As we're fading out of this podcast, you're hearing the theme music provided by D Swan. Thank you, D, for the song "Haters" for our theme, and thank you, Nate Szynski, for editing this podcast. Thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.